all you need to diagnose a CiES fuel sender is a power supply. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lab power supply, but just a source of 12 volts or more. A digital voltometer that reads hertz, and connections to the sensor, which would be red to the red power wire, black ground to the black wire, and in our case this blue wire is attached to the red lead on the voltometer, black lead being attached to ground. So once I add power, 14 volts, I get a stable and uniform hertz output off the blue wire. Blue wire is always used for diagnosis as well as digital input into other applications. If I change this, it changes the hertz value, but again, if nothing's moving, the hertz value will be relatively stable. What can happen, however, is that maybe I have a lower voltage. Maybe I'm down in around 6 volts. Well, I'm going to get a relatively erratic output that has nothing to do with the sensor, and just the fact that I'm below the voltage level enabling the sensor to actually have sufficient voltage to operate. Again, once I turn the voltage up to a reasonable voltage, we return to the same exact value. There we go. Once it went down, that's kind of an interesting response. It went back up. As soon as it's up, I get 76.03. Well, how could I get a low voltage? Well, that's a good question. So here I have a decade box, and what the decade box allows me to do is put variable resistances into the system. So if your ground is not ground, and change the this is slightly moving because this thing moved a little bit. If I just kind of set it like this, it'll stay at 165.9. But we can start adding in resistances, and all of a sudden we get a flaky response. As soon as the resistance is removed, it goes right back to a stable response. And that resistance has to be relatively high, greater than 100 and say 50 ohms. All of a sudden I get a bad response. Turn it off, and I go back, with 100 ohms, I get a decent response, and then direct connection to ground, I get a stable response. That's all you need to diagnose a CiES fuel sender.